This is Dr. Mayor Eisenstein. Every Thursday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, I will be coming to you live on ProgressiveRadioNetwork.com. I will bring my background as a physician and as an attorney to help you with a minimal pharmaceutical and a minimal surgical approach to your medical issues. Please come join me.
So to join in on the conversation, call 888-874-4888. Ask Dr. Eisenstein, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, only on Progressive Radio Network.
You're listening to the Progressive Radio Network, your number one source for progressive commentary.
I'm going to...
Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin on Progressive Radio Network. Very glad that you're joining us again today. Today, we are going to be having a rather detailed discussion on something called hydro-fracking. This is becoming a national and even international issue, and it deserves lots of attention, and we're going to give it a lot of attention from both sides of the aisle, so to speak. We're going to have a few different people in our studio and on our roundtable, from a gentleman who is a hydrogeologist of Conrad Geoscience Corp., who is a member of the Oil and Gas Association of New York State. And we also have the state senator, Tony Avella, who has recently developed and drafted legislation to ban hydro-fracking in New York State. And for many people, this is a very, very important issue because their water, they are concerned, at their homes is being jeopardized. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to also bring one of the members of the gas industry who's been working as a geologist in the field for many years to weigh in on his perspective on the dangers of fracking and what is not the danger. And of course we want to have, and we'll go first to the state senator of New York State from the 11th District, Tony Avella, because he's got a very short amount of time, and go into why it is he has proposed this rather stunning piece of legislation, which, if passed, would lead the country in legislation opposing fracking. Senator, are you on the air?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Wonderful to have you on.
Well, thanks it's a pleasure to be on your show.
Absolutely, absolutely. Next time, please leave more than 10 minutes. It's a subject that needs more than that. So tell me, what is
Well, I think you and I could discuss the issue in 10 minutes. I don't know if the industry can.
I don't know. Well, let's do our best here. First of all, I'm looking at a piece of a peer-reviewed journal article that just came out this morning, Senator, from Duke University on methane contamination of drinking water accompanying gas well drilling and hydraulic fracturing. And, you know, it points out that there's documented systematic evidence for methane contamination of drinking water specifically related to shale gas extraction. What do you have to say about that?
I agree. I mean, that's one of the main issues that myself and many organizations and environmental organizations and individuals oppose hydrofracking. The very nature of the process is something that cannot be regulated because the oil and natural gas companies are pumping high-pressure water and chemicals into the shale, and there's no way to recollect that water. And what happens is the water is contaminated. I mean, Pennsylvania has had this now for a number of years, and there are any number of homes that you can go into Pennsylvania and turn the tap on, and you can light the water on fire. I don't think we want that to happen in New York State.
Yeah, I saw that same image in Josh Fox's Gasland, which is rather awesome. Yeah. Now,
and I understand because my bill would ban both the horizontal hydrofracking and vertical, and there are some vertical wells that already exist in New York State. And there are some farms where you can turn on the tap already and light it on fire. I was actually surprised to hear that from some folks in New York State that we already have this problem.
Is that something that happens everywhere that hydrofracking occurs, or is that just in exceptional cases?
Well, I can't tell you if it happens everywhere. I mean, I would think that it's something that happens over time because the water will find, let's face it, the water with the toxic chemicals will find its own level. Does that mean as soon as you drill a well, you're going to see the possible disastrous effects of the water contamination? Maybe not the next day, maybe not the next month, who knows, maybe a year from now. But the potential and the eventual contamination is obviously what we're talking about. Because all it'll take is one major situation where the water supply for the state is contaminated, and we're in serious trouble. And remember, New York City gets all of its water from upstate.
Exactly. So what is it specifically that inspired you to develop this bill that goes beyond the current moratorium that was put into place by executive order by then Governor Patterson?
Right.
And it really takes a whole other level to this game.
You know, it's funny because I didn't think it did, but apparently it does. I used to be a member of the New York City Council from 2002 to 2009.
Yes.
And when I was in the City Council, I actually introduced a resolution asking the state legislature, and this is maybe about 3-4 years ago, asking the state legislature to ban hydrofracking then. And I told people during my campaign that this would be one of the first bills that I would introduce if I won the Senate seat. I just think, you know, looking at this from a common sense point of view, we have oil and natural gas companies who will put toxic chemicals into the ground. There's no way to recoup that wastewater. The oil and natural gas companies won't even tell us what toxic chemicals are being used and in what proportion, using the excuse that this is, patented information.
Patented, you mean proprietary?
Yeah. The sheer possibility.
Otherwise, we could see what they were using.
Right. The sheer possibility, you're right. I stand corrected.
That's okay.
The sheer possibility that the water supply could be contaminated leads me to believe that we're not ready to do this, period. And that's why I think a ban is appropriate.
Senator, I don't understand something. Various public utilities and corporations have been polluting our water and our land and our air for decades. This is really not new. Look at fluoride. Look at CFCs generated by GE. Look at all the various forms of contamination that many of us who are environmentally minded have been protesting against forever. Why are you making an exception now?
Well, I think this is a more serious case, and again, we're using a combination of very serious toxic chemicals combined with water, and it does have the great possibility to enter the water supply. This is a much more serious situation, and plus the fact we shouldn't have allowed those other companies to do those things. I mean, we should be.
Are you willing to go after them after we take care of this issue?
Well, maybe.
Okay. Well, listen, I've now got your cell phone number, so we might have to do something.
I personally, the very fact that you mentioned those other situations, that's the history of what we have allowed in the past.
Yes.
We should learn from, previous mistakes. This has the potential to be extremely damaging. Only just a couple of weeks ago, a well exploded in Pennsylvania, contaminating, I think, farmland for at least a mile around. I hope I'm quoting you correctly.
Where in Pennsylvania?
I don't remember. I don't have that in front of me. But it was a major incident just a couple of weeks ago.
What happened?
The well exploded.
And
the well absolutely exploded. And some of the chemicals started spilling out onto the ground around the well for at least a mile, from what I understand.
Mm.
But you have a situation where New York City is unique in terms of how we get our water, and especially for New York City. The potential for a major disaster is there. I just don't think it's worth it. This is just common sense. And I think, in the upstate, a lot of upstate elected officials, mostly Republicans, will say that we need the jobs. That's their main argument for doing this. We need the jobs. And I'm not saying that upstate New York doesn't need a real kick in the butt to get the economy going. This is not the way to do it. And I'm more than willing to stand with my upstate colleagues to do whatever is necessary, but not this.
Well, if we were to go into wind, as an example, or massive solar farms, would we need people employed for those?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And we should be doing a whole lot of other things.
Would you be willing to stand?
We need a much more comprehensive energy policy.
Right, indeed.
But that's a whole other discussion.
Would you be willing to? Well, look. See, the thing is, we do need something, whether it's oil or gas or geothermal. We need some form of energy to keep our systems going. Would you be willing, if it's not going to be hydro-fracking, to get behind some kind of legislation that would help to support renewable resources?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, that's some of the things that I've been working on already. No, there's no question that we need to sit down and come up with a comprehensive plan.
Good. I'd like to sit down with you about it, because I actually have some ideas that are within the mainstream, but even a little bit outside of them, and I think you'd enjoy them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And let me just quickly mention, one of the first, even before I introduced the ban bill, I introduced the Hydro-fracking regulation bill, which is 2697, which lists a whole bunch of things that if hydro-fracking were to go into effect, here's from A to Z what needs to be done. But I still think that even if we did that, we would not have enough Department of Environmental Conservation, inspectors to be around these wells all day long. So I still think the ban is appropriate. And by the way, for your listeners, the bill number is 4220, and I've come up with the expression 4220 or fight. There used to be an expression in American history, 5440 or fight. So it's 4220 or fight.
Sounds like Jackie Gleason somehow. I don't know why. 23 Skidoo or something. Would you mind talking, first of all, I know that you have analyze the research data, the science behind hydro-fracking. Is that correct?
As much as possible, yes.
Okay, I mean, certainly you wouldn't draft a bill unless you really scrutinized the science or had advisors telling you about the deleterious effects.
The problem always is, with any controversial subject like this, is who does the study, who's interpreting the data.
And who paid for it.
Yeah, and who paid for it. So, I mean, I'm sure the oil and natural gas industry will come up with their own studies that show, there's no problem, we can do this. But on the other hand, there are equal number of studies that show that there are significant problems. So, I mean, unfortunately, when you get into a debate over the science, you always have competing, interests.
Perspectives.
And you also have two different perspectives, two different sides.
I'm interested in all of it. I'm interested in hearing what everybody has to say, quite honestly.
That's why I mentioned common sense.
Yes.
There needs to be a little common sense.
I think you're right. Now, can we move over to a related subject, which is the water withdrawal bill?
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on that? What is its
Sure. I'm actually
essence?
a co-sponsor of that.
Mm-hmm.
The State Senator Grisanti, who's chair of the Environmental Conservation, has introduced it. I'm a prime sponsor as the ranking member of the Environmental Conservation Bill. I think it's a good thing, and most environmental groups do. There's been some issues that have come up within the last couple of days, which I've sort of looked at, and while I understand people's feelings about this, people are raising the issue that this somehow will allow hydro-fracking to exist. And that's, in my opinion, absolutely not the case. There are two separate issues. Mm-hmm. And the other argument has...
What gives rise to that, even a long, far-fetched idea that it could give rise to that?
I don't know. I think some individuals are just using this as an example to try and kill the bill. The problem is...
If you would, please just define why this bill has been proposed.
Right now, any company can just withdraw from a watershed any amount of water any day. There's no management
at no cost. At no cost.
Right, exactly.
No monetary cost, I should say.
No monetary cost. Ooh. This bill at least
starts
the process by which businesses would then, of anybody who's extracting more than 100,000 gallons. Has to get a permit from DEC. And we at least have a monitoring system and start to get a handle on exactly what's going on.
Is it 100,000 gallons, Senator, within a certain period of time?
Yeah, a day.
A day?
It's a lot.
That's a lot of... Who's running this state anyway? No wonder we're broke.
Well, the interesting thing is the bill that my hydro-fracking regulation bill would actually... if that were passed, which I'd rather have the ban go, would reduce that number to 50,000 because the 100,000 is a lot. But at this point, we have general consensus to get this bill passed. In fact, it passed the Assembly 136 to nothing. I think we need to pass this bill so at least we have some controls.
Yes.
Then we can at least look at it and refine it as time goes on. But right now we have nothing. There's no oversight. There's no controls whatsoever.
So that means GE and all the other major corporations can come and just suck water out of our public reservoirs at the rate of 100,000 or 200,000 or 300,000, whatever, exactly, gallons per day, and not pay a sou for it?
Yeah, not pay a sou, and they have no regulation.
And nor do they have to clean it after they use it.
Well, I was just going to say that. There's no regulations. Nothing.
Oh, my God.
So we need to do this. We need to do this. No bill is ever perfect, but we need to do this.
Indeed.
And then we can go from there.
I would like to bring Carl Arnold of the Sierra Club to bear for a moment because he's been studying, of course, the hydro-fracking issue as well as the water withdrawal issue a bit. And I want to know, do you have a question to ask the Senator about this? Welcome, Carl.
Thank you very much. I'm a little bit on the spot because I didn't expect to be asked, so I haven't thought about this.
I didn't expect to be asked.
Well, if you want to think about it, I'll ask him a question in the meantime.
Go right ahead, and then I'll come up with something.
That's fine. Senator, why is it that these companies, there is not an accompanying invoice that accompanies the withdrawal of 100,000 gallons per day?
I don't know. You got me. That should have been something we should have done a long time ago.
We're in 2011.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that I didn't get involved in politics more deeply like 100 years ago. I don't get this. I mean, it's like the people are asleep at the wheel, with all due respect.
Well, absolutely. And this bill has been talked about for a while. I mean, obviously, this is my first year as a state senator, so I can't go really to the history of why this hasn't happened before, but it should have happened a long time ago.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I say this is groundbreaking, because for the first time, we're going to have at least some controls and some regulation.
Exactly.
And some oversight.
What kind of
Does
response?
Does it need to be stronger? Probably. Go ahead.
What kind of response are you getting among your colleagues in Albany and New York City to the ban legislation?
The ban bill is starting to gain traction.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely. There's no question that as more and more people become aware of the issue, because for the most part, hydro-fracking in the last couple of years has been insider baseball. There have been environmental groups, there have been elected officials, but I don't think the general public has been aware of it as much as they should have been. The recent New York Times
they are now.
What?
At least that they are now.
Oh, yeah. The New York Times article that came out about a month ago really shed some serious light on the issue. Mm-hmm. So the average New York Times reader was now getting involved in this. And I think as, we come up to, maybe looking at what DEC will recommend in terms of regulations, or if they decide even not to go ahead, more and more people will. And I start to talk about it wherever I go now, even, in the city of New York, much less up here. And the more I talk about it, the more people, well, you're kidding. I didn't know that. And most people say we shouldn't do anything that has even the remote possibility of threatening our watershed supply.
When will this be coming up for a vote?
Well, the bill, I'm not going to push, the bill to try and get a vote in the committee yet until we start to get critical mass, until we get more supporters to sign on to the bill, until we get more community involvement, and the environmental groups have more of a chance to reach out to the public.
Okay,
I'm happy to say that Liz Kruger, my colleague from Manhattan,
sure,
as soon as she heard about my ban bill, she called me up and she says, I'm going to sign on. Assemblyman Bill Colton in the Assembly called me and said, could I introduce the same as the ban bill in the Assembly, and he's already done that. So I think, the ball is starting to roll downhill, and I think it's just a matter of time as more and more people get involved.
Well, let's ask. I'd like to bring on John.
Well, I hate to. I did say 10 minutes, and we're now up to 20 minutes. So I hate.
How do you like that? Do you have 2 more minutes?
I have 2 more minutes, but
okay,
then I'm going to
fine.
have to go.
And in fairness, I really want to bring John Conrad on, who's president and hydrogeologist of Conrad Geoscience, and he's a member of IOGA. He's been providing environmental services to government agencies, institutions, and businesses for some 20 years. John, are you on the line?
I am. Glad
Excellent.
to be here.
Hi, so glad to have you. Listen, I'd like to ask, you've been listening to the discussion, I take it?
I have.
Excellent. I was wondering, do you have a question or comment to make to the senator who's proposing this this ban bill? What would you have to say to him about this?
Well, it's really a question, and that is, since New York imports 95% of the gas that it uses, and
from
the
where?
Energy Information Agency of the DOE predicts that we're going to be using triple the amount of shale gas just 24 years from now. I'm wondering where he thinks the natural gas should come from that really underpins the economy of the state of New York.
Good question.
But it's a question that has nothing to do really with the issue of hydro-fracking. So if you take that argument to its extent, then any bad practice, you could argue away, well, we need to do this. Yes, we need to find other energy sources. There's no question about that. But because we need to do that, does that mean we have to accept something that has the potential to damage our water supply? No. In my opinion, that's a very poor argument to use in defense of hydrofracking.
Well, if you talk about banning hydrofracking, you're essentially talking about banning all gas production, because the vast majority of gas wells now require hydrofracking in order to be productive.
Why is that?
Because that's the state of the technology now. We've gotten at most of the easy to get at oil and gas now, and we're fortunate enough to have large reserves of shale gas in New York and elsewhere. But the technology required to extract that gas does require that you hydraulically fracture the shale formation. So even if it didn't happen in New York, if the ban went through successfully, we would be importing all of the gas we need from other gas-producing states.
I guess unless...
assuming that other states didn't impose their own ban as well. I think the interesting thing, and I do apologize, but I do have to run.
Sure.
Is you mentioned the state of the technology. That's the question. And my ban bill basically says until the technology reaches a point where we're not risking the watershed, we just shouldn't do it.
Oh, how wise.
Well, thank you for allowing me to come on the show.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure we'll continue this.
I'm sure we will. State Senator Tony Avella, thank you very much for your good work, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks. John, you raised some interesting points, and I'd like now to bring you into the fold here with Carl Arnold, who is a member of the Sierra Club, and he's on the Executive Council in New York State and in New York City, and is specifically on the task force of the Gas and Drilling Committee for the Sierra Club, and Emily Squires, who is a woman who happens to live both in New York City after having won 6 Emmys as a director of Sesame Street, and your kids probably watched her shows. And she also has a house in Wayne County, correct? In Pennsylvania, she and her lovely husband Len. And they're very concerned about what's going on in the hydro-fracking conversation, because they've seen Gasland, they've seen other video on YouTube, they've studied the reports and the science that shows really rather emphatically that methane is in the water following hydrofracking practices, and the use of deleterious chemicals utterly contaminates the water. I'm just curious about what you have to say about that.
That question is to me?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, I do not recommend watching the documentary Gasland as a way to learn about gas drilling or hydraulic fracturing. The scene that everybody remembers from that film is the flaming faucet, and we heard it just mentioned again. And you really do need to know that had nothing to do with gas drilling or hydraulic fracturing. That was naturally occurring biogenic methane that happened to be in that drinking water aquifer. And that's a common situation throughout the Marcellus Play and elsewhere in the U.S.
So it has nothing to do with the process of fracking in those areas. It's just a naturally occurring phenomenon.
That's right. It was coincidental that it occurred where Josh Fox happened to be filming, but it was unrelated to hydraulic fracturing.
Yes.
But isn't it interesting that in so many cases in Wyoming, in Colorado, and in Pennsylvania, and in western New York State,
in Arkansas and Texas,
that the flaming water just happened to become available right after gas drilling began?
Well, that's one of the things I love about this subject, because it's really forcing a lot of us to learn something about geology. And most people did not know that methane occurs naturally in drinking water aquifers and in a lot of our drinking water wells. And that does happen to be the case in the Marcellus region and a lot of other places in the U.S. and around the world.
But most of these people who have had problems with their water being contaminated say that it wasn't contaminated before the drilling started.
Well, if they did baseline testing to show that's important, and that's what we recommend, and that's what the industry is doing now. All of the operators that I know of are voluntarily testing all residential wells surrounding gas wells before the wells are even drilled, and then usually during the process and then after, to basically understand and make sure and document that isn't happening.
Of course, what also happens when the gas is loosened up by the hydrofracking process is that the other materials that are down there also get loosened up. The heavy metals, the naturally occurring radioactive materials, such as radon and boron and uranium. And they get mixed in with the drilling muds and the fluids that do come up back to the surface along with the gas. That is the amount that does come up. Apparently, according to Professor Tony Ingraffi of Cornell, a rock fracture specialist, he says that now 65 to 90% of what gets forced down in the drilling process stays down, so that whatever gets loosened up then has the potential for getting mixed in with an aquifer and then spreading. And those underground toxic plumes already exist from other reasons. For instance, in Endicott, New York, Long Island apparently has a whole bunch of plumes that they are very familiar with, and even out in Wyoming, even though the geology may not be identical, certainly these plumes do occur, and some have occurred with hydrofracking in Wyoming and Sublette County, for instance.
Well, you raise a couple of issues there. One is the possibility of fracking fluids and additives migrating upward from the Marcellus shale into fresh water. You also mentioned the wastewater issue. On the first, there is no evidence that that injected fluids would ever migrate through a mile or more of bedrock up into freshwater aquifers. That's never been documented, and there are a lot of reasons why it would not happen, or is very unlikely to happen. The second one, though, the what's going to happen to the salt water, the wastewater that comes up with the gas after hydraulic fracturing, is an important question and a big issue and a real challenge to the industry, because here in New York, you're going to be prohibited from releasing those fluids into the environment. They will need to be properly treated or disposed of. But you should know that the DEC now for almost 3 years has been studying that issue and almost all the other issues that have to do with potential impacts to the environment. And there will be a regulatory framework to make sure that those wastewaters do not end up being released into at the surface without proper treatment.
Of course, they already have been. In Pennsylvania, just in the last few months, there was an investigation, and they couldn't get away from the fact that some of these wastes went through normal waste treatment plants, which basically dilute them and then put them into rivers and pollute them. It was about a year ago, I think, that Pittsburgh had the Monongahela River contaminated, and for several months the residents of Pittsburgh, over 300,000 of them, couldn't rely on their normal drinking water source, and it's been going on since then. There is no waste treatment facility in New York State that can handle the naturally occurring radioactive materials or the heavy metals, or, as you mentioned, and I'm glad you did, the brine, although you didn't refer to the heavy metals and the radioactive materials, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
First of all, let us let everybody know that you are listening to A Better World with Mitchell J. Rabin on Progressive Radio Network. We are conducting a forum on fracking, and we have Carl Arnold with us from the Sierra Club. We have Emily Squires, who is a resident in Wayne County, Pennsylvania, where fracking is gas companies are eager to begin. And we have John Conrad of the IOGA organization, which is an oil and gas association. And I'd like to continue with Carl's question, but I'd also like to just first ask you, if I may, John. You basically said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there isn't currently an answer to the wastewater issue that results from hydrofracking. It's being studied, but we don't really have an answer just yet. Therefore, it does remain a pretty critical problem. Is that so?
Well, it is an important issue and a real challenge to the industry. But right now, remember, there is no hydraulic fracturing happening in New York, and so there is no need right now for large-scale treatment or disposal of the brines that eventually will be produced from the Marcellus. So,
but for the 33 other states in the country,
most especially Pennsylvania,
and Pennsylvania especially because it's our neighbor, and we have Emily here with us, it is a problem. And so it just seems that, as with any industry, all sorts of safeguards need to be put in place, which would lead me to think, before something's actually done, from that point of view, it would seem that you might be in favor of Senator Tony Avella's ban, because it doesn't state that fracking won't be a possibility, but it will become a possibility once these issues, such as wastewater treatment, is addressed. Is that a fair thing to say?
Well, I haven't read that particular bill, so I won't comment on that. But I will say, I'll just point out that Pennsylvania is already tightening up its regulations on wastewater treatment and effluent limitations, and really catching up with what New York has had in place for years already. So you are seeing a response. You are seeing a recognition in the state of Pennsylvania that they need to do a better job with the wastewater. As far as there being the ability to do it, the technologies, I think, have caught up with the need. There are a lot of options for treating or disposing of wastewater from hydrofracking. You'll see those come into place in Pennsylvania very rapidly, I'm sure. And when the need arises here in New York, you'll see them deployed here as well.
Indeed, but you, if I understand you correctly, while there are some responses to the issue, which you've said a couple of times, is a real issue for the industry itself, let alone for the regulatory bodies. It's not answered. Do you advocate carrying on hydrofracking without an answer to that critical question of wastewater?
Well, here in New York, it would never be allowed. I'll give you an example.
I know, but I'm asking you as an advisor to the gas industry, how you personally and professionally would feel about recommending fracking under these circumstances.
Well, again, the first step in drilling a gas well is applying for a permit from the DEC. And as part of that permit application, the applicant, the gas company, must show how much water they're going to be using for hydrofracking, where they're going to obtain that water, and ultimately how they're going to dispose of the wastewater. That's at the permit application process. If you can't demonstrate that you have that plan in place at the time you apply, you will not get that drilling permit, and that well will not be drilled. So there is a regulatory system in place to make sure that wastewater that wastewater is not generated unless there's already a plan in place to get rid of it.
No, I understand your point, and on paper it sounds good. There's only one little problem. It's called lobbying. And we know that there's a huge amount of campaign monies being generated by corporations, gas companies, into the hands and pockets of senators and assemblymen and mayors all over Pennsylvania, not to mention elsewhere. So how do you factor that in? In other words, can the gas industry in any way be self-monitoring? In other words, let me step back for a moment. I was thinking about this earlier in the day and the pleasure I was going to have in having you on the show with our other esteemed colleagues here. And I began thinking from a businessman's point of view. I love making money, by the way. So, I thought, what business would I rather go into? The wind turbine solar panel business when looking at the future potential, or into the hydrofracking business? And when I weighed these two next to one another, John, it appeared to me that going into the hydrofracking business was fraught, no pun intended, with liability issues, health issues, issues having to do with the environment, legal, etc., and really possibly disrupting nature for the sake of my children and my children's children. And if I were to go in the direction of renewable, it looks like it has an infinite supply of energy. It's clean use. It gets a smile from the public instead of a frown. And I could probably get a lot of decent government subsidies over time, tax credits and the like, to make that a very viable business. What are your thoughts? From a business point of view, strictly business.
Well, strictly business, and from an energy future point of view, I think that most people who pay attention to these issues, including the oil and gas industry, I'm certain, see our energy future as all of the above, all of the things that you mentioned will eventually be needed and will eventually be deployed, but including natural gas. And the main reason being, although there are a lot of reasons, but the renewables and some of the things that we will need in the future are simply not going to be scalable within the time frame that we need them to be. And so for the foreseeable future, the next several decades, we'll be using large quantities of natural gas. In fact, increasing quantities of natural gas because it will be required. The other issue with renewables like wind and solar is because they are intermittent. By definition, really, at least for now, with the technology that we have today, they do need to be backed up with natural gas. And again, to do it at the scale that you're proposing, you would need a lot of natural gas to provide that backup.
Well, it's interesting because there is a whole state in Germany that in the year 2009, not 10 and not for the first half of 11, but in 2009 generated 47% of their electrical needs purely from wind. And Germany continues to lead the world in wind energy production. And they are scaling upward toward, at this point, they're at least at 7 to 9% of power for their entire country generated from wind alone, let alone geothermal or hydroelectric or solar. Carl, do you know that?
I've certainly heard about Germany, and I've heard about Norway, and there are a number of other countries that are way ahead of us. Even China, I believe, is ahead of us in solar. But there are a couple of things that John mentioned that I would really like to pick up on, if you
Please
don't mind.
do, absolutely.
He said that there is no hydrofracking in New York. That is simply untrue. There's no horizontal hydrofracking. There has been vertical hydrofracking.
Could you define the difference?
Years. Well, one is vertical, where you just basically put a drill and a pipe down, and that's it. And you take it out, and then you extract the gas. When it's horizontal,
is it using harsh, toxic chemicals to do so?
Yes, it's still hydrofracking. It's just not on the same scale as horizontal, because with the horizontal drilling, you go down whatever the depth is that's necessary to reach the target shale. Generally, in this state, somewhere between 6,000 and 9,000 feet, perhaps 10,000 in spots. And then the drill starts to go horizontal, and it can go for about up to a mile or mile and a half from the original vertical spot. And from one well head, you can actually have up to perhaps a dozen wells going like spider legs out from that one spot. So there is hydrofracking, but more to the point is that it's already done damage. For instance, there have been explosions and fires in Lebanon, New York, in Maryland, New York, in northern Otsego County. The Ross 1 well, very quickly after drilling began, contaminated 8, possibly 9 drinking water wells. This is as of last July. And the people who were suffering from the consequences have testified publicly about this. And there are also people, I believe, in western New York, in Cattaraugus County, if I'm not mistaken, who could light their water months ago. Now, he also raised the issue of waste, and waste is a huge, huge problem because there is absolutely no capacity to deal with the heavy metals, the radioactive materials, and the non-biodegradable chemicals that all are part of this process. To build such plants would be extraordinarily expensive, and considering the state of the budget of New York, that is not very likely. We're talking about either reverse osmosis or dialysis plants, which might be able to filter out these materials. I am told by a PhD chemistry professor upstate that the brine that is also coming up with the drilling muds and fluids and all of the other materials is 7 times the concentration of the ocean, and it's impossible to filter that out. So even if we had the budget
it's like
to
we
build,
have our own Dead Sea.
well, and these are old oceans that got buried. That's exactly why they're so salty.
At least they're very therapeutic.
Well, I wish they were. But then even to maintain such plants would be extraordinarily expensive. Mm-hmm. So where would this money be coming from? Would the industry want to spend the billions necessary on those plants? And then, even when those plants, let's assume that they actually work as advertised, what happens to the stuff that's filtered out? It still has to go somewhere, and it has to be stored permanently. Well, there are already problems with injection wells in Ohio. Ashtabula, Ohio, has suffered swarms of earthquakes from those injection wells. In Arkansas, they just...
And this is all documented?
Oh, yes. This is the state of Arkansas stopped, this is about 6 or 8 weeks ago, stopped the use of 2 injection wells because there was a swarm of earthquakes that really looked like it was because of those injection wells. Now, I'm going to be very precise here, not from the hydrofracking process itself, but from the results of the hydrofracking process, getting rid of the waste by forcing it down, generally old abandoned wells.
So it was their method of wastewater treatment that wasn't working so well.
Well, you can't really call it treatment. It's getting rid of it. It's disposal. Of it. Right, and also
I guess it's a form of treatment.
Okay, and they're looking into the same issue in West Virginia, that injection wells that have been used for getting rid of hydrofracking waste may have caused some earthquakes there.
This is upsetting. Look at Japan, for crying out loud.
Well,
John, what do you have to say about this?
Well, a couple of things.
Sure.
This question of who would pay for all these treatment systems, it's not the state of New York. And in fact, it is private industry that would build and operate these treatment plants at industry's expense. And in fact, that really is part of the economic stimulus that people talk about when they talk about hydraulic fracturing. There's a collateral work that needs to be done to support hydro-fracking, and wastewater treatment is one of those. Plants need to be built and operated, designed, and so, but that would be done by industry at industry expense and would certainly add to the cost of producing natural gas, but it is a necessary expense when you do natural gas production from unconventional shales like this.
Does it still remain profitable to even underwrite a cost like that?
Well, that remains to be seen.
Well, you've, I'm sure, studied the numbers. I mean, if that is the case and it is still profitable, that means your markup is extraordinary.
Well, you also raised the question of, is it even technologically feasible? And the answer, again, is yes. And in fact, in Pennsylvania and in other regions where saltwater needs to be disposed of, there are various technologies that can be used. Membrane filtration and crystallization are ways of treating the water so that it can be either reused or disposed of. And you probably do know the industry is already reusing and recycling a lot of their water. In fact, almost all of the initial flowback from these wells, the water that comes back up in the few days or weeks after hydraulic fracturing, will soon be recycled 100%. And that really just leaves the produced water, the water that comes out with the gas over the life of the well, as the biggest challenge ahead of us, I believe.
Emily.
So I just would like to, as Jane Q. Public here, like to talk about the softer aspects of this, the harder aspects, actually, of this. I just don't see any way possible to ease, regulate, however you want, whatever word you want to use, withdrawing hundreds of millions of gallons of fresh water from our lakes and rivers and streams. I don't know how can you... That's taking fresh water from us. That's just the very beginning of this. The trucks,
and our fish.
Right. And the humongous trucks that go back and forth on all on our little back roads and harming the infrastructure on these small local
running
highways.
On oil.
Running on diesel fumes that pollute the air. The quality of life. I mean, I visited these people in Dimmock, Pennsylvania, who have spent 2.5 years having had their well contaminated. I mean, there is no quality of life. The oil and gas, the oil companies give them huge vats of non-potable water and little bottles of fresh
non-potable
water. Well, for everything but drinking water, yeah. Some things. I mean, I believe that's what they said. It was non-potable, but I mean, it's just the matter that they have to, truck it in, and it's just a horrible, horrible way to live. It's a horrible way of life.
There's got to be a better way to make some money,
right? And if you see, for example, the gorgeous land of Pennsylvania and upstate New York, and then you drive by these fracking, whatever you call the platforms, the drilling platforms. I mean, it's just horrific. It's just it's a scourge on our life, the way we like to live.
And landscape, I'm gathering.
Landscape, yeah, right. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I realize those are...
It's an interesting point.
Well, it's a lot of points. It's got to do with quality of life.
Indeed. John, what are your thoughts?
Well, there's so much to talk about here.
Yes.
One of the things I sometimes recommend to people is to, if you can, someday visit Chautauqua County, New York. It's one of the westernmost counties in the state of New York. It's also one of the most intensively drilled counties in New York. It's got about 10,000 wells that have been drilled over the years. Many of those are gas wells. Many have been hydraulically fractured. Now, these are conventional vertical gas wells. But if you're interested in what the landscape looks like in a county where there has been historically a lot of oil and gas production, go to Chautauqua County, and I think you'll find that it is not. It doesn't show signs of the environmental devastation that a lot of people think that gas drilling brings. It's a very rural and I think very beautiful county with a lot of tourism and recreational opportunities. And so remember, these drilling pads are temporary. They're up there for a period of months, and then the rig goes away and goes on to the next drilling site, and the site is then restored. And so the idea that the drilling process itself, there certainly is an impact. There's a temporary short-term impact during the drilling process, but that industrial part of the process is temporary.
Well,
when was the last well in Chautauqua County of those 10,000 or so? When was it drilled that you were referring to?
Well, right now there are about 3,500 gas wells still operating, 5,000 wells total if you look at oil and gas.
Mm-hmm.
Those wells, there are wells still being drilled in Chautauqua County today.
In which layer?
Most of these have been in the Medina Formation, which is a gas formation.
Right, and what about the Herkimer or the Trenton Black River? Aren't those sandstones?
Well, TBR is a carbonate, and but those formations are being drilled not just in Chautauqua County, but across the western and southern part of New York as well.
Right, but as I understand it, the very first gas well was drilled in New York State in 1821, and as you said earlier, the easy stuff has been gotten at, and that's why the chemicals are now used with hydraulic fracturing. The original literal meaning of hydraulic fracturing is exactly what it says. It uses water at high pressure to fracture sandstone or other softer layers. When they got into the harder layers, they had to add the chemicals. And sure, there are tens of thousands, actually, of abandoned wells all across New York State. And in fact, I know a geologist upstate who is mapping them now, because apparently the DEC doesn't even have an accurate count of where they are, and what they're doing now. And it seems that a whole bunch of them, the old ones now, before the chemicals, and perhaps before hydraulic fracturing, from before 1949, when that was invented, they're still seeping, many of them, and leaking who knows where underground. So it's not quite the bucolic scene that it may appear on the surface. But also, you referred to the temporary nature of this. Well, I've seen 5-acre concrete pads. How do you get rid of those pads? What happens to all the roads across farmers' fields that were put in by the companies to make the drill pad? And what about the pipelines that are being installed as we speak in anticipation of the greater amount of gas to come out of the Marcellus, and then after that possibly the Utica Shale, which might even be bigger than the Marcellus? What we were talking about is an area that is our food shed. This is the southern tier of New York State, northern tier of Pennsylvania. It supplies Buffalo and Syracuse and Rochester and Albany and Oneonta and Binghamton and Philadelphia and New York City and Scranton and Wilkes-Barre. And by the way, even economically, a study was done, a very preliminary study on the economics of this by a professor up at Ithaca College. And he based his numbers on not only New York State and federal figures, but also on the highest price for gas the summer, I believe, of 2008. So he projected for the next 20 years that gas would bring into the state approximately $22 billion based on that highest price of the summer of 2008. Whereas wildlife, hunting and fishing, dairy, other agricultural farm receipts, grapes and wine, and especially tourism would bring in well over $300 billion. Yet, if this industrial process comes in, and I'm sorry, but it is, we see in too many other states that it's a lot more permanent than was just described. Mm-hmm. This would destroy whole sections of the existing industries.
John, your last comments.
Well, I believe, if it's not obvious already, I believe that gas drilling and hydraulic fracturing is compatible with all of the things that were just listed, agriculture and tourism and protection of our environment. I believe we have the ability to do it safely, and I think we're fortunate here in New York that our Department of Environmental Conservation has devoted the last 3 years to anticipating what the risks and impacts might be and then putting in place procedures for minimizing those risks and impacts.
But are you making these statements based on belief or based on actual hard science?
Well, based on my experience as a hydrogeologist, you have to understand, I've spent the last 20 years of my career protecting the water resources of the state of New York.
You would think so. Yeah, you would think so. That's why this is so unusual, that there would be such a disparity between what appeared to be two sides of really the same coin. Everybody wants good, healthy water. Everybody wants good farmland. Everybody needs this for our own sustenance. Why in the world be in a business that seriously threatens it? You know, I would like to have you back on, John, on another occasion so we can further explore this subject before we start drilling and exploring the ground. Wonderful. I so appreciate your input. John Conrad, Carl Arnold, thank you so much for being part of the roundtable, and Emily Squires. Emily, there are a few events taking place in New York regarding fracking, the level of awareness about it and education about it, of which this radio show is part, because we have input from a hydrogeologist as well as from others about the nature and severity of the situation. And tell us about what's going on May 16th through Hillary Baum and May 25th through Water Defense.
Right. There, as you said, there are two events happening. The one on May 16th is called Water Fight, with an exclamation point. Fracking, food, art, and economy. Obviously, we are on the side of banning. This is the case. So, in fact, both of these are pretty much in that angling toward that. So that is Monday, May 16th, 2 to 5:30. The doors open at 1:30, and from 5:30 to 7 there'll be food and drinks and networking.
Is that a contact information that you have?
It's going to be at the Tishman Auditorium at the New School, 66 West 12th Street, and I'll have to find the...
May 16th at Tishman, 66 West 12th Street. Starting at 1:30, and then on May 25th there is
May 25th. We're having waterdefense.org, the Coalition for One Voice, of which I am a part,
and a Better World,
and a Better World, yes, and the New York Society for Ethical Culture, and like 37 co-sponsors. There are organizations all over the city who are part of this. Are presenting a forum on fracking. It's Wednesday, May 25th at 6 o'clock. At the New York Society for Ethical Culture at 2 West 64th Street. We have amazing speakers. I mean, really very deep, interesting speakers. Weston Wilson, an EPA whistleblower who talks about the makeup of the people who that are researching this problem. Sandra Steingraber, an acclaimed ecologist and author of the new book Raising Elijah on the Impacts of Fracking. Robert Howarth from Cornell University is a biologist and co-author of the new study on the true climate footprint of shale gas, and Winona Houter, Executive Director of Food and Water Watch. And our moderator is Craig Unger, New York Times best-selling author and Vanity Fair contributing editor. And if you need any information about it, contact Claire Sandberg at claire@waterdefense.org. I can give you her telephone number, 347-709-3585, or you could call me, Emily Squires, 212-864-8229.
Excellent. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Carl, so much, and John Conrad, and State Senator Tony Avella for being part of our show today. This show will be archived at www.abetterworld.net permanently, so you can always go back, share it with your friends, get educated about this, look at it from all sides, come to understand the seriousness of the situation, as well as what possible alternatives exist to this situation, as well as study the ban bill of Tony Avella's so we can all weigh in properly. This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. Thanks so much for joining us. Visit us at our website at www.abetterworld.net. Become part of A Better World family, and I'll see you all next week.